The sun hung low over Dustwell, turning the sky into a burning sheet of gold as the townsfolk gathered around the old platform, whispering with a mixture of shame and curiosity, for today was unlike any auction they had ever witnessed. Today, a young woman named Alara, barely 20, her pale blue dress torn at the seams and her blonde hair tangled from days of captivity, sat tied to the wooden post with her newborn wrapped tightly against her chest, while Sheriff Maddox stood in front of her, revolver in hand, forcing a cruel smirk as he announced to the crowd that since her husband had failed to pay his debts and had died trying, she and her baby were legally property to be sold in act. So cold that even hardened ranchers shifted uneasily. Yet none dared speak against the law. Maddox twisted for his own greed, because the sheriff had an iron grip on Dustwell and a gang of deputies ready to silence anyone who questioned him. Alara's eyes remained fixed on the crowd, desperate but defiant, silently begging for mercy she knew might never come, whispering soft promises to her crying infant that she would protect him even if it cost her life. When suddenly the murmurs died out and a stillness swept over the street as a tall shadow appeared at the edge of town, walking with a steady, unhurried pace, and every man turned to look at the stranger approaching through the dust. He was massive, towering, built like the mountains themselves, with a gray mane of hair falling to his shoulders and arms thick as tree trunks, wearing a fur-lined vest and carrying a long weather-worn rifle across his back. No one recognized him, yet something about his presence carved silence into the air as if the earth itself stepped aside for him. Maddox narrowed his eyes, gripping his pistol tighter as the stranger climbed the steps of the platform with calm, deliberate movements, his icy gaze locking onto the bound mother and the helpless infant, and then shifting to the sheriff with a cold fire that froze the man mid. "Auction's over," the mountain man said, voice low and rumbling like thunder rolling off distant cliffs, and the crowd shuddered at the certainty in his tone. Maddox scoffed, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him as he snapped, "You don't give orders in my town, stranger." Yet the mountain man simply unstrapped his rifle with practiced grace and rested it over his shoulder, not pointing it, not threatening, just holding it in a way that made every man in Dustwell rethink his loyalties. Alara, for the first time in days, breathed with hope as the stranger stepped between her and the sheriff, shielding her entirely with his massive frame, and the crowd began to shift, whispering his name like a forgotten legend resurfacing. Garrick Hale, the reclusive hunter from the northern ridge, a man rumored to have survived blizzards, wolves, and worse. A man who never came to town unless something weighed heavily on him. Maddox tried to regain control, lifting his revolver to Garrick's chest, declaring that interfering with law business would get him killed. But Garrick leaned in close enough for only the sheriff to hear and growled, "You call this law? Selling a mother and her newborn? That ain't justice. That's sickness." The sheriff's trigger finger twitched, but before he could fire, Garrick moved like lightning, gripping Maddox's wrist with one giant hand, twisting until the sheriff cried out and dropped his weapon. The deputies reached for their guns, but the townsfolk, emboldened by the mountain man's defiance, rose in defense, forming a human barrier around him and Alara, shouting that enough was enough, that Dustwell had lived under Maddox's corruption too long. Outnumbered, the deputies hesitated, and Garrick used the moment to cut Alara's ropes with his hunting knife, lifting her gently to her feet, his voice softening in a way that surprised even him as he said, "You and the baby are coming with me. No one's taking you." Alara trembled, not from fear but from the overwhelming realization that someone, a complete stranger, was willing to fight for her when no one else had dared. Maddox, humiliated and furious, roared that Garrick would not leave town alive, but the mountain man simply raised his rifle with unshakable.com, the barrel glinting in the afternoon sun, and warned that the first man who stepped forward would be the last man who breathed. The standoff stretched like a taut rope, until Maddox, seeing the crowd turning fully against him, spat in the dust and ordered his men to lower their guns, backing down with venom in his eyes as Garrick escorted Alara and her infant off the platform, guiding them through the parted crowd like a guardian carved from iron. As they reached the edge of town, Alara finally spoke, voice trembling with gratitude as she asked why he had saved her, and Garrick answered simply, "No child should grow up in a world where a mother is sold like cattle. No woman should face that alone." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered her thanks, and the baby, sensing the warmth of safety for the first time, fell silent in her arms. Garrick led them toward the mountains, away from Dustwell's cruelty, where the sky glowed with promise, and though none of them knew what the future held, they walked with a single shared truth that in a world full of brutality, one act of courage could rewrite fate itself. And if you want more stories just like this full of emotion, bravery, and unforgettable twists, make sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. **